Welcome to our session on academic writing. In this first part 1 session, we're going to actually talk about where you get your ideas, how you decide what you're going to be writing in your paper. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with something that I use. The first thing you want to do is to compile your thoughts regarding your reading. In your projects, you're going to use your reading, your experiences during the class, your journal, things that you've researched, and then conversations that you've had with people. All those things are going to be ideas that you need to come up with a project. Now, the first thing that you've done is you've read books. Before you even started your class, you started reading. I'm using this is the tool that I used while I was a student at BGU. Whenever I read a book, I would have one of these small legal pads and stick it in my book, and every time I came to a quote that I wanted to remember that I knew I was going to want to use again, I would write it down. I'd start off using the title of the book and the author, and then I would write out the quote that I thought was very important and that I didn't want to forget. And then I'd include the page number where I got that quote. So you'll see this is just the first page, then I staple it together, and then I kept these in a little binder that was alphabetical by the author. Now, this is handy for some people, may not work for others. I happen to be traveling a lot and couldn't put these quotes in my computer, which would have maybe been easier. It depends. I'm going to show you another idea using that same book, the Servant Leadership. This is how some people would keep track of their quotes. In other words, author's Greenleaf, book title is Servant Leadership, the page from the quote, and they'd put the quote right here. Now this system is actually better if you are able to get onto your computer and save this way. You list your other books. This could be quite a large document. The handy thing about this is you can sort or find by a keyword. Let's say we wanted to find the word, now of course we can see right here, but if we wanted to find something about listen, then we can type that, say find next, and here's our quote that talks about listening. So when you have pages and pages of quotes, but you have a particular topic that you wanted to remember, or an author, you can search that way. So this becomes a very handy tool for keeping track of quotes from your reading. And I highly recommend that you just come up with some way that you're going to do this, because you will find after you've done a couple of classes, you will not remember what you read and where to find that quote unless you've written it down somewhere like this. The other thing that I recommend is that you learn how to do some mind mapping or come up with an idea. So let's pretend that you have taken the China class and you're trying to come up with ideas about what to write your project on. Well, mind mapping is a very helpful way of kind of deciding how, taking the materials that you've learned, what you've read, the things that really stood out to you, and you want to figure out what to write about. Well, you can say, this is your central idea, is you need to write a project about China. But, so you want to throw out your ideas that you've had maybe through your reading and through the class. What was it that stood out that you really want to incorporate in this paper? Now you may say, well, we went to a house church, we saw the model, I want to compare that with the Three Self Church and the Third Church. Or maybe there was a student in the class with you named Jim, and he had an idea for church planting, and you really want to incorporate those ideas that Jim had into your project. Maybe you want to talk about morality in China. Maybe that's an issue for you in your city. Maybe the issue is economic growth and its effect on materialism and capitalism in China, and how that maybe can be incorporated into what you're experiencing in your ministry context. Or maybe it was a book. Maybe you read the Tiananmen Papers book and you thought, wow, so many of those ideas in that book would really apply to my city, my ministry context. I want to remember to put that into my paper. This is just a tool. You don't have to do this, but if you're really having a hard time coming up with some ideas for what you're going to do for your project, this is just one way to start. Then, after you've kind of gotten an idea of what you want to include in your project, then you can begin to come up with maybe an outline of what you want to include in your project. It can just be something handwritten. It doesn't need to be formal, but just a way for you to begin to think about your project. I also want you to remember that in your papers, you need to make sure that you're quoting from the books. Now, I've brought in, I thought this might be interesting to you. This was my paper for the Overture 2 that I took in China in 2008. And so this was my project. Now, the formatting then was different, so I've been going through and making changes to the formatting of my paper just so that it corresponds with what you will see in your papers. But I thought it would be good for you to see how important it is to include the quotes from your reading. So here I've read this book called Christianity in China, and this was all that I wrote about it. This is Protestantism in contemporary China. So what I've done is I've got quotes in here in this book report. I've got quotes in this book report on Jesus in Beijing. And so what I think is important for you to realize is that everything you read, all these books and everything that's in your journal, these have made an impact in the way that you are going to write your projects. So I'm going to come down here. I just wanted to show you briefly, these were my book reports. Here's my journal. And I thought it would be fun for you to see how I've incorporated some pictures. So this was the day that we went to the Great Wall in China, and here's my picture. So I thought that would be really fun for you to see. I also, in another session, I wrote about how important it is to maybe bring in pictures that are of the speakers. So here's one. We had this Chan K. Tong who spoke to us, and here's his picture. Not a very good one, it's kind of fuzzy, but it also helps me to remember him in years to come. And here we visited the Forbidden City, and I thought this was just so wonderful to have these pictures in there to help me to remember, because this becomes a not only a good paper, but it also helps me to remember my experience. So now I'm going to go down to my project, and I want to emphasize that your project needs to incorporate reading. And so as you're writing your paper, be sure that you refer back to your books. See here, in his book, Jesus in Beijing, I quoted from his book, and then I talked about the impact of that book as well as other books. Here's another book that I quoted from. So this becomes very important to your professor to know that you've read the materials and you've seen how it will relate to your project. So I'm going to start another session, Academic Writing Part 2, and we'll talk more specifically about writing and using Turabian formatting. But I just wanted to give you a brief overview on how to get some ideas for writing your paper. Hope that helps.